You're listening to a Brain Stew Fresh Fright Review.
What's up, creeps? It's time to howl. It's the first Epic Film Guys Fresh Fright review of 2025. I'm Justin.
I'm Be Ready. Ow, 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 ow.
Oh, yeah, baby. Howl at the moon, because this is one of your most anticipated movies of 2025. We just talked about that earlier this month in our most anticipated episode, which we had our good friend Phil from the Spook House podcast come on. Thanks again, Phil, for hanging with us on that one. But it is time, man. Those of our listeners that have been with us for quite a long time, they know that the Wolfman is very near and dear to both of our hearts. But before we go any further on our actual review, tell me, Brady, what is it that makes the Wolfman as a character so special to you?
I don't know. I think for me, as somebody who didn't grow up watching horror, there were still some classics like this one that I could watch as a kid, or they'd be on like TCM, Turner Classic Movies.
Sure.
And, you know, I think this one, the special effects, especially for the time, were great. And, you know, not to rip it off, but classic. And then as you get older, you know, these themes that go along with this tale, and I'm a sucker for anything that is tragic or just like sad. I mean, I watch Manchester by the Sea like every 2 months.
You're so fucked up, dude.
You know, yeah, right. Just to feel something. But this tale or this metaphor of, you know, whether it's you're helpless to something that's taking over you, it could be a sickness, it could be an addiction, which is usually what it's associated with. The tale of Larry Talbot is just almost flawless, right? It's born out of tragedy. He goes back to see his family because his brother's dead, and then he falls prey to this curse. It's just timeless, you know, and I think that's why we've seen so many iterations of it, so many versions of a werewolf, whether they're good or bad. And I just think that it's one of those reasons for me that I'll always be there to see a new Wolfman movie.
Yeah, and very, very well said. And we haven't gotten a lot of Wolfman movies. We've got a lot of werewolf movies, but it's funny to think that we have the OG original Wolfman, then we have Joe Johnston's remake, which is most definitely a remake of the original source material and the original film. And now, fast forward to 2025, we're getting Leigh Whannell's complete reimagining of the concept of the Wolfman. I really, much like you, there's a lot of reasoning why Larry Talbot's story in the original is so special to me. I think it was one of the first movies I got to see also on Turner Classic Movies. And it was one of the first DVDs that I bought and watched over and over and over again. You and I are huge fans of the classic Universal monsters. And it's great to see, even though it's been quite a few years since Whannell's Invisible Man, which we both really enjoyed, really loved. I think it's a modern horror classic in its own right, that we're finally getting a follow-up in its own way to another Universal monster reimagining. And you and I talked about this for months leading up to actually sitting down to watch it, that this is a complete departure from the mythology, from everything you know and love about a classic Wolfman story. Silver bullets, howling at the moon, being, if you are bit by a werewolf, you will become a werewolf yourself. None of that shit. Some of it is reinterpreted for modern audiences, but for the most part, it seems like it's a completely new thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. And, you know, I feel like we can't talk about this movie without, like you already mentioned, The Invisible Man. And that was, I mean, you know, before The Invisible Man, they tried The Mummy in 2017, I think.
Their MonsterVerse. Yeah.
God,
yeah.
and it was such a fucking flop that Universal was like, all right, maybe we got to back off of this. So they kind of went to this piecemeal approach, you know, like one-offs. And The Invisible Man, I mean, we talked about it even last night after watching the movie, but it's just fucking blew my mind. You know, the way that you could modernize this tale, make it scary, make me gasp in the theater, and then make me want to keep watching it over and over and over, right? And it's one thing about Elizabeth Moss, like she's kind of, you know, she went through that era of becoming a powerhouse, and she's still around. But that you're right, man. It's a modern classic, and so even though this version of the movie that we got, Wolfman, went through a little bit of development turmoil, once Leigh Whannell was attached to it, I was very, very fucking excited.
Yeah.
I do think, like you said, even though once we found out it was kind of going to lose that mythology of the werewolf, I was a little skeptical. Not downplaying it or anything, but I was like, all right, well, you and I had multiple conversations. Does the Wolfman only work because of it's a period piece? Can a Wolfman movie survive that modern retelling or reimagining? If you lose what we think makes it special, right? The silver bullets, the full moon.
Yeah, it's
you
the
get bit by a werewolf,
basic
you gotta
chat
kill
list.
it.
Basic chat list for what you consider a Wolfman movie, or for even most werewolf movies. Because I know it seems like our audience is probably like, motherfucker, what are you talking about? Werewolf movies and Wolfman movies are the same thing. But Wolfman movies are very, very specific in my point of view. Werewolf movies can take lots of liberties in their own way, but we do know most of this mythology that has come into the zeitgeist of the genre of werewolf movies rather came from the original Wolfman. This movie, 5 years after The Invisible Man, like I said, he wants to do a modern interpretation of the material. I think our biggest turmoil occurred, me being the massive Ryan Gosling stan that I am, was he was originally attached to be the Wolfman in Whannell's new version, and it was announced that he left the project, and we had Christopher Abbott in to replace Gosling, and you convinced me on him. You really did. It took a while. I was really bummed. I don't usually complain a lot on Twitter about casting announcements, but I remember being a little bit of a prick that day about it just because. But I have to say right off the bat, before we get into the actual review of the movie itself, I'm actually glad it happened, because after watching this movie, one thing is for sure, I can't see anybody else in this role, in this version of the story, than Christopher Abbott as the character of Blake. I think he absolutely transformed into this character in so many different ways and made the movie what it was. But I think it's time, if there's any person listening, B-Ratty, that doesn't know what this Wolfman is, why don't you fill them in?
Yeah, I'm going to go short and sweet with this description. But
Okay.
A family at a remote farmhouse in Oregon is attacked by an unseen animal, but as the night stretches on, the father begins to transform into something unrecognizable.
Unrecognizable. Or if you like horror movies and monster movies, you'll know exactly what the fuck it is. Or
Well,
maybe
that's
you
the
won't,
thing.
because it looks a lot different.
Right off the rip here, initial thoughts, leaving the theater. I don't think anybody was overall unhappy with the movie. But I think I was probably more positive than anybody else in our group who went, you, Danny, Brian, and N. But, I think for me, what it is it really, the tragic nature of it was still there. But as Leigh Whannell had pointed out in a couple of interviews before this is more so a tragedy of your body falling apart. This is, and that's what his focus is. His focus is more so on the transformation of Blake, our main character, who is, aka Wolfman, into this Wolfman character while he's terrorizing his family unknowingly. I love the metaphor it provides of this cycle of parental abuse or helicopter parenting, where it's like, in your efforts to protect or overprotect your child, you're turning them into a monster, or you're making them you're creating this rift between you two, so you're accomplishing the exact opposite. And I love this metaphor too of communication. So when you're in these cycles, you can't communicate with that other person, and I think the ways that Whannell and company portray that worked incredibly well here. One thing that I wasn't super happy with, in a small script, small cast, there you are going to need a lot of people to stand out. Julia Garner is great. I think that she is great in Ozark. I thought she was pretty good in Apartment 7A for what she was given. And I was excited to see her in this because of that. And Leigh Whannell even said that he wanted her to be like the Shelley Duvall in The Shining to this movie. And I got to say, I'm sorry, I just didn't feel that. And I don't know if that's her fault, a writing fault, a pacing issue. We can get into that. But I do feel like most of the emotion for me came from watching Blake's transformation and not so much the family.
That makes total sense to me. I'm going to go out on a limb right now and let the audience know, because we're only going to be covering this movie one time. So this is going to be full spoiler. We're going to
Yes.
open up the wounds, chew them off, and spit blood at you. That's what you're getting.
Mhm.
The Wolfman itself, or Wolfman as we like to call it. There is no "the" in the title this time. It's just Wolfman, and very literally so, because this movie decides to use Native American mythology to explain this curse in its own way, and a sickness. And I actually loved that it utilized that, because wolf face, as they described in the opening credits, is something that's very distinct and in the history of Native American culture. There's a lot of mythology through Native American culture that refers to humans turning into animals. It's a huge part of their culture. And I liked that it decided to go that route, especially considering the setting. We're in Oregon, right? Isn't that where this takes place?
Yep.
And it's gorgeous, beautiful woodlands. It's just amazing imagery to see. It's a good location to place a Wolfman movie. It made a lot of sense to me. The opening of the movie I thought was fantastic. We get Blake and his father. Blake is a child, and they live remote out in the middle of nowhere in the woods, and they're hunting. And we're getting a glimpse of how Blake's father's parenting works. As you said, this helicopter parenting where he's trying to protect his son almost so violently that he's actually causing this distance between them, and he's almost this terrifying presence in his attempt to protect his son. And we get our first glimpse of what we come to know as the Wolfman in this opening. And I thought it was a brilliant, suspense-filled, tension-driven sequence where they're out there just trying to hunt a deer. And you learn very quickly when Blake, who's this small child attempting to impress his father, takes a different route to go attempt to get a shot at a deer, and in his crosshairs of his rifle sees something he's never seen before, this unknown menacing figure, and they feel they're being stalked, and it leads to this amazing scene of them hidden in this I guess what do you call it, like a deer
blind.
Yeah, where you're up in this tower where you attempt to usually sit there and find deer to shoot with your rifle, and they're there, and the thing tracks them to that location. And then fast forward, I think it's what, 20 years or 30 years or something like that, and we're in New York City, and we get our first glimpse of Blake, his relationship with his daughter named Ginger, played by Matilda Firth, and we kind of get an understanding of the family dynamic where he's a stay-at-home dad, he's in between jobs, and his wife Charlotte, played by Julia Garner, is kind of like the moneymaker of the relationship. He comes to find out within the first scene of the family sitting down to have dinner that his father, who he hasn't spoken to in many years, has drifted off into the woods and been declared dead. So he has to return back to his family home in order for him to basically clean out the house. He takes ownership of the house, and they decide whatever they're going to do with the house itself. And that's, of course, where we see, as we always like to say on this, hijinks ensue, and the terror begins. I thought that was
a howling good time.
Yeah, a howling good time. I think it was a good enough introduction to the family.
Sorry.
No,
that was like me putting a period on your sentence. Yeah. No, I thought it was a good intro, not to cut you off. Again, when it goes back to a small cast and a small script, how much time do you spend building up the family versus, in the pre-horror setting versus when they're in it? I thought they did a good job of showing this sort of fractured relationship between Charlotte and Blake. A little bit of the writing is on the nose, where it's kind of hitting you over the head with marital problems or what it's trying to convey between the father and the daughter. But again, that's kind of how Wolfman movies go. So I didn't have too much to complain with it, but there were some moments that do take you out where you're like, all right, this is a lot. Let's keep it moving.
A little bit of it was not just on the nose. A lot of the dialogue I felt to be in the realm of a little corny, but at the same time, I totally understood where they were going with the direction and how they wanted to convey these characters. I think I liked that it jumped so quickly back to being in Oregon and they're on their way to this house. There's this tension in the family where, you know, the wife knows that Blake is much closer to their daughter Ginger. They have a much closer relationship, and they seem like they're becoming further and further apart in terms of their marriage, and they're just trying to stick together. The whole idea is, let's go as a family up to my old childhood home. We can spend the summer there. You can write your book, and we can kind of come together as a family. This is a common theme in so many different movies and stories. So it did make sense to me, but it also does something very specific in terms of segregating the characters to a location where it's so remote that you're not going to see a lot of characters. I mean, if you look at the list of characters in this movie, it's like 10 characters. That's basically it. That's literally it for the movie. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. This is not a high body count Wolfman. If you liked Joe Johnston's version where the Wolfman killed like 100 dudes, you know, in the woods, you're not going to get that here. It was a little off-putting for me knowing that right off the bat. Once you get to this location, you're like, oh man, Wolfman's not going to be picking off any, you know, parking garage attendants or,
But to
or
be
crossing
fair,
guards.
the 1941's Wolfman also did not have a high body count. So
That's true.
I'm okay with that. And that was in a much larger, heavily populated area. I think there's a graveyard keeper in that one. There's the friend who's with them when Larry gets turned, Bela. So 3 people get killed in that movie. I mean, plus Larry, so 4. But so again, it's not a very high body count, but it doesn't have to be as long as you are hitting the right marks
exactly.
on everything else.
If you've seen the trailer, it would come to no surprise that upon their arrival at them attempting to locate his family home, he seems to have forgotten where it is. They have an accident. That accident is caused by Blake actually seeing the silhouette of what you realize is the Wolfman, and they have a massive accident where this huge moving truck goes down this hill and everyone seems to come out unscathed except for Blake. It's flipped on its side. This is one of the most intense scenes of the movie, even though we already saw it in the trailer. A childhood friend of his, I believe his name is Derek.
Played by Benedict Hardy.
He is in one of those deer watching stations, and they see that he's there. It says that, hey, I'll help you out. I haven't seen you in a while. I'll show you where your dad's house is. You don't want to be out late at night. Though he's like out there, and it's already getting dark, so not sure that makes a lot of sense. But
it's like, all right, cool, I guess.
Immediately during the accident, this character is thrown from the vehicle, and you hear the sounds of an animal lurking upon this vehicle, and you see, from Blake's point of view, him get torn away into the woods. He's gone. Not the most brutal takeaway, but it was a good moment of suspense. I felt the family is able to escape very easily, I would say, out of the side of the flipped over moving truck. And, you know, they can sense that something's there lurking and on their tail. And they run to the house. They're able to luckily find the house. And then once you get into the house, I'm going to kind of generalize from here forward. I'm not going to recite the entire movie, but this is where the actual movie itself starts in its own way, where they're in the house. They realize Blake has been scratched by the Wolfman, and he's starting to transition. He's starting to feel sick. And I think this is where you can see Whannell's influences on his sleeve, quite literally. It's almost as if he was like, hey man, I want to make The Fly, but just use Wolfman instead. It really is a new version of that in terms of the transformation, him descending into this deep, dark sickness, and the transition from being human to having animal DNA injected into his veins, and him becoming this almost monstrosity of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, Whannell even said in the interview that he was very open about kind of taking a huge inspiration from Cronenberg's remake of The Fly. And he says what The Fly did that a lot of other practical effects driven horror movies from that time did not do was bring the tragedy out of these practical effects. So it wasn't a joke in The Fly. It was there to illustrate someone who was dying of an illness. And I was like, I've got to do that. It's not about being funny or icky or gory. It's about the tragedy of human body falling apart. And I really appreciate what he did with it. I mean, in this, is there too much time in the house? Sure.
Probably.
But
Yeah.
I also didn't know going into this that it was all going to take place over one night, right? I thought that there may be, a weekend, maybe an extended weekend, who knows, holiday on a Monday. That they're up there and his transformation is kind of happening over this time. But once you're in it, it makes sense that he would be kind of devolving into this transformation over the course of a couple hours. But there are some really good fucking things for even, I think, that make up for the lack of suspense with how much time is spent in the house.
Well, yeah, because that's the issue. Not to cut you off there.
Yeah.
I think Whannell, it's not that he has trouble maintaining the suspense, because he has great moments of suspense. There's amazing tension once they get into the house. This thing is outside, basically surrounding them, sniffing out the house, knows they're in there, and they're trying to figure out, obviously the surroundings are foreign to them. The wife and the daughter have never been to the home. Blake hasn't been there in a long time, and he just got fucking scratched. So he's like all over the place, not really knowing where he is, and them trying to, get the electricity on, all of those things. He maintains it pretty successfully, but there are moments when you switch, to them like using the radio to try to call for help. There's just extra moments added in that I feel kind of take away from the suspense, but it is a hard act to juggle, to maintain that throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think what I was trying to say too was just that lack of suspense that's just inherent with what they're trying to accomplish is made up for by how brutal some key parts of the transformation are. So for instance, that scratch you were talking about on Blake's arm, they wrap it up when they find out that he's bleeding, and he's like, "Oh, I think I broke it on the glass," and Charlotte's like, "That doesn't look like glass."
It's very fucking clear when they open his sleeve up that it's not a glass cut. It literally looks like claw marks through his arm.
So she throws some alcohol on it, and then they wrap it up, and then a little bit later they notice that his arm is like dripping blood, so they roll his sleeve up. It's cut. I mean, the bandage is soaked, and then they pull it back, and it's pretty gross. Like, it looks like what you would think of animal DNA.
There was a very audible sound of a groan or like an ooh from the audience when they showed that for the first time.
And that's not where it ends, though, because the biggest groan came from when Blake you see that he's starting to turn, and they're hinting on these key moments of communication just falling, but because Blake is starting to sound like an animal. From his point of view, that you get these interesting changes. From his point of view, he can kind of understand Charlotte, but can see her, and she has this weird glow to her. Her eyes are like,
it's almost like night vision, like how it's been reported that dogs and wolves see a night vision at night. So it's kind of giving that perspective and that visual when you're going from his point of view to hers.
Yep. And then, her point of view is just her husband is been attacked by something and he's sick, but there's no.
And he looks like shit. He looks like total shit, man.
But then he sees his arm, and he runs to the corner like a dog would, and he starts fucking scratching the shit out of it, and then he starts eating it. He starts eating away at it, and I was not expecting this part to happen, but I mean, Justin, you were sitting next to me, and you even sat up in your seat and you had your hands over your mouth, and it was just so shocking and so visceral, and it worked perfectly.
Absolutely.
That is what we're talking about with Leigh Whannell. Like, he might not be able to build suspense in section A this specific way you're expecting, but man, he can really hit it when it counts, and he can make you feel uneasy there. So I loved that.
Yeah, all of the transformational stuff was amazing. I loved the introduction to when the character Blake first realizes that he's not himself. Things are going wrong. He finds some of his dad's old jerky. He's starving. He starts eating it, and his teeth are falling out. And
yes.
Then he lays down. She has him lay down, and he hears this sound, which you're led to believe as an audience member that it is the WolfMan up on the roof. He slowly leads himself up to the top level of the house, opens a closet, and it's just a spider. And he's realizing now that he almost in his own way has a spidey sense. He has these animal senses like dogs and wolves do, or they have enhanced hearing mechanisms. Mm-hmm. And so just this pounding that's so loud to his ears is a tiny little spider Actually, it was a big fucking spider, to be honest.
It was pretty.
It was a pretty big fucking spider. But anyway, just the sound of a spider on a wall in a closet captured his attention. And much like you said, after we see that scene, and Charlotte realizes this isn't my husband anymore, and his daughter Ginger is noticing this difference, and this is coming after there's this little exchange with them, but throughout the entire movie, where he explains to her that his goal in life is to keep her protected. It's almost in its own way exactly the way that his father mentioned it to him, except for it's softer, it's more loving. And they do this thing where he says that she's a mind reader. It's very cute. It kind of gets old after the five times they do it, but
right.
What am I thinking now? And then she puts her hand on his head and says, I love my daughter. And he says, amazing. You must be a mind reader. You must be psychic. At this point, she's starting to realize daddy's not daddy, and she's very terrified of this. I'm not one, actually I am one, to sometimes shit on child performances. Who am I trying to kid here? Who am I trying to kid? I did feel if there is a weakness in this central cast, it may be Matilda Firth as Ginger, as the daughter. I think in the opening of the movie, she's wonderful in the basic family dynamic scenes. But when it comes to moments where she's supposed to be frightened or react to his sickness and his transformation, not every bit of it worked. It could have just been the takes they chose for the movie. It's entirely possible. But I think the chemistry between Abbott and Firth are fantastic, maybe even better than the chemistry between Abbott and Garner. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but
oh, I for sure do. I think but I think that's the point too. Like, even in the first act of the movie where you're getting this family dynamic, Charlotte, tells Blake, like, I feel like I don't know how to be a mother to my daughter. Like, I don't know how to spend time with her anymore. So you see there's this it's not even just a married couple in trouble. It's the whole family is off. And like you were saying, I do think that the chemistry between Abbott and Firth is great when it needs to be. But yeah, those moments of peril for her, like, maybe I lack that paternal instinct, because I was getting annoyed with her. Like, where she's like, there's moments where her and Charlotte are in the house and Blake is outside with, surprise, surprise, a second Wolfman. And she's like, you have to let daddy inside. I'm like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? But the way she's saying it is so frantic. It's almost like stale too. Like, the delivery is off, and maybe it's because she's a young kid, but then we see performances of children who are really fucking good. So yeah, I do think maybe it was a slight miscast.
It's entirely possible. It could be either of those things. But you mentioned the fact that there are two werewolves, there are two wolfmen. And I mentioned this a long time on the show. I think when we first saw that the Universal Halloween Horror Nights dude in a costume, and they were saying that was Blumhouse's new Wolfman. People freaked the fuck out. We talked about it on the show. It was a very large topic of discussion. I'm hoping that imagery and that going viral is not going to affect the box office or people going out and taking the time to see this movie. I'm going to do whatever I can to let the world know that thing you saw is not exactly what the Wolfman or the different versions of the Wolfman in this movie are.
Right.
But so yes, we have Blake transforming slowly. We have the OG Wolfman that was the one that provided him the scratch on his arm and gave him the sickness. He is now down with the sickness. If Jeremy were here, we miss you, buddy. Working on his projects. Yeah, we're nowhere near as on par with that shit as you are. But they meet face to face, and Blake isn't fully transformed. And I liked that about this version of the character to a point. We don't get it's not like the original Wolfman where he's laying there and you have this lap dissolve and then he's the Wolfman. It's like normal dude into fully hairy. Like this is much more like The Fly, where it's a slow transition, even though it happens all in like a couple hours, into this animal person mutant hybrid. And he has to come face to face. He's still human enough to know the instinct to protect his family. So when this thing basically grabs his leg through, I think it's like a cat door or a dog door or something.
Yeah, it was a dog door.
They go head to head. They battle it out. And the battle was pretty good. It's pretty quick, but you had mentioned last night, and I liked how you explained it. It was a very grounded, realistic, very animal-like brawl. It wasn't like an MMA fight or a John Wick style battle between two wolfmen, you know?
Right. It was fucking Anderson Silva and Kale Sonnen in fucking Wolfman garb.
Yeah. Not at all. Just a real visceral face-to-face. And
I mean, a lot of that was just body slamming, and that's what it is. It's like grabbing, throwing, because it's, this the OG werewolf or Wolfman is trying to get to Charlotte and Ginger, and then Blake is trying to stop him. So all it is one getting up off the floor, stopping the other one, like throwing them behind it. It just felt as realistic as a wolfman attacking another wolfman could be. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
It's hard to say it's realistic and grounded, but that's kind of what was.
The interesting thing about these wolfmen and the interpretation is they do get down on all fours. Yeah. I mean, when you watch Lon Chaney Jr. in the original, he kind of lurks down towards his knees like he is on all fours, but he never goes on all fours. He hunches over, but he crouches. Yeah, this version, he gets down on all fours. They get down on all fours, and they run around like a wolf would. So at this point, spoiler alert, Blake kills in this massive battle this other wolfman. And what does he come to find out as he lifts the sleeve of this wolfman?
He sees the fucking tattoo of his family's name and realizes that his dad wasn't dead.
He was a wolfman.
He was a wolf.
The whole opening of the movie, there was a scene that added a lot of great suspense to the mythos, if you will, of the wolfman, this version. It's his dad down in the basement after they had that encounter, and he's on his radio telling a local neighbor, like, I'm going to kill this thing. It's out here. So it's a local legend. They've heard about it for years, and he sees it. He says, I'm going to kill this thing. And I'd like to believe that all these years while Blake is in New York City, found his own life with his family and all that, that his father's been still on the hunt for this thing. Almost like those crazy Bigfoot hunters that are out there probably right now today that travel around the world trying to find this thing that they hear about, and
mountain monsters.
Mountain monsters and all that good stuff. So he kills it, and then he realizes it very quickly. That's my dad, and even Charlotte and Ginger realize it. And this is where the movie really jumps off, and Blake's transformation goes full force. We get an actual transformation scene. Unfortunately, Blumhouse decided to spoil most of that in a clip last week on the internet.
Yeah.
I think maybe possible damage control, them thinking people aren't paying attention, because there has been not much hype for this movie. It is a January release, but there's still more to it than what you see in that clip. And I think the behind the scenes clip they released of the practical effects used for the Wolfman really showcase how unique and different this version is. I had a few people reach out last night after I posted my blurb about the movie, just wanting comfort and support to know that this Wolfman doesn't look awful. And I said to you last night after the screening, this look is much more The Fly mixed with Werewolf of London than the Wolfman. If you put a bouffant haircut on this motherfucker, it would have looked just like Werewolf of London. But
yeah. No, I think it's it just goes back to the type of movie that Leigh Whannell is trying to show, and it's, and it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of this episode is, can you bring a Wolfman story into modern day, right? But that's what you have to do, because what it essentially is it's almost like a form of rabies in a way, like that kind of disease.
Sure.
But it's like mixing animal DNA. So this is what you would come up with in your mind if you thought, like a wolf thing bit me and now has transferred its DNA, mixed it with mine, and I'm transforming. Like, that's exactly what you'd get. You'd get these jowls, the small flat nose, you'd get the eye hood,
the massive underbite. That's classic Larry Talbot. Absolutely.
And I mean, to their credit, there are a few call outs to the original, especially with what he's wearing.
Yep.
Blake, that is, he's wearing that olive green shirt, like that kind of like military button up.
Isn't he wearing brown pants too? It looks like his pants were the classic pants too. So he does do that to at least show respect or pay respect to the original version. We knew that he wasn't going to go Rick Baker Wolfman or anything close to that. So this is kind of, in a way, like a hairless Wolfman. He doesn't have much hair. He loses hair in some spots, and then he grows at other places.
Well, he had like 12 hairs on his chest, like me, so it's fine, you know. Sometimes I like to walk around the house with no shirt on and, you know, put my teeth out like an underbite and look in the mirror
Dude, when
and
I
go
do
up to
that,
all the
Danielle
cats and
comes
go,
up to me and she
"Arr."
starts picking the hairs off my back and my chest. She's like, "I'll take care of that for you," and she just literally plucks them off of me. She'd probably have a lot of fun with Wolfman. Jesus.
Yeah, probably. But I mean, it's a good transformation. I definitely think that it's going to be a divisive film for people who go into it expecting it to be like an original Wolfman transformation. It's not going to be your American Werewolf in London. It's not
Absolutely
going to
not.
be
It's
the
not the
Howling.
howling. No, no, no. If there's no
Um,
lap dissolve, even though I was hoping they would like homage lap dissolve, you know,
it could have been cool, but I like what they did. It was um tragic. It was beautiful. It was haunting. The music by Benjamin Wallfinch was really good on it. You know, that even though it's a shorter transformation that a lot of us like with our werewolf movies, it worked for this movie because you're seeing the pain he's in. You're seeing kind of this final version that he's become. Where it's, I think that's the part we talked about in the car last night. That that's where it takes over him. Like that's kind of where his last defenses against it evaporate, and he is Wolfman. And then his family knows that they're in peril. So you know what that last act is Charlotte and Ginger running through the woods. They end up back where their truck had overturned and the neighbor had disemboweled, and they find his gun. And they climb back up into that same exact deer
yep,
blind.
yep. Full
And
circle to the opening of the movie.
Yep. So Blake's Wolfman comes up, does the same thing as the beginning of the movie, like climbs up the tree blind, and then you see his claws come up above it. He puts his face up. Charlotte's got the gun pointed at him. There's that pause where Charlotte's probably thinking, "Am I going to kill my husband? What does my husband become?" Like, and then Ginger goes, "He's ready to end it. He's ready. He's
She
ready
read
to
his
stop
mind. She was
suffering."
psychic all along, Brady. She knew how to read
Which
his
I'm
mind.
like, man, this fucking kid immediately was like, he wants you to kill him. He
Well, you
wants
see
to
it in his
die.
eyes. I mean, that's one thing that
Sure, he's
again,
suffering.
he's suffering. The centerpiece of this movie, and the reason I think to see it more than anything else, is Christopher Abbott's performance as Blake / the Wolfman. He's brilliant. It is a transformative performance. The more layers they add on top of him, the more horrific he becomes, and the more tragic his character is. I felt that. I really did. In his eyes, there's so much emotion in his eyes. That's what really makes a performance of this type, especially when you're under monster makeup. And like you said, this is nowhere near the amount of layers that Lon Chaney Jr. wore in the original, or what Benicio del Toro wore in Joe Johnston's film. But it still makes him not himself. He is this other living creature. And I felt every bit of emotion from him under the makeup. He gave a brilliant performance. So I'm glad that he was cast. I really think that is one of the biggest positives about the movie. I know some fans, like you said, they're going to be unhappy with the look. I think you either have to accept it and just go in on the movie and say this is what it is, or don't let the design ruin the entire movie for you. I get it. That imagery is so classic. But look what we just saw with Nosferatu. Robert Eggers took a classic design and he altered it. He gave his own version, and make it or break it, it doesn't ruin the movie. It really doesn't. I like to think. There is some great set pieces in the movie, one that we skipped, but there is a moment with the OG Wolfman before he meets his demise where he's chasing them. They're trying to start the car. That's a scene from the trailer that leads into a really good chase sequence. And then of course the ending, like you said, of Blake chasing his family. We don't even necessarily know if he's chasing them to attack them or chasing them to want to be with them, because the whole point of this character throughout the movie is, I'm here to protect my family. And it was what was drilled into his head, all that generational trauma through his father of protecting your family, and him trying to take that, take the mantle on for his own family and do the same thing. There's a lot of strong themes here. I feel like not a lot of them panned out. I think a lot of it is undercooked in a way. Had there been a little bit more development for the characters, maybe a little bit less time inside the house and a little bit more time with the family prior to them getting there could have been other ways of conveying that.
Sure. And this is probably a very personal hit for me, where it hits the marks, is this theme of an overprotective parent who ends up causing a rift in your relationship.
Yeah.
That's, something that I grew up with. Like my dad wouldn't even send us to public school because he was worried that I was going to get involved with drugs, sex, and learn evolution. So on a much different scale, but like as I grew up, it was like, you're coming into conflict with, this massive amount of hovering that's happening above you, where you're also trying to, be one, a normal functioning member of society, but two, just growing into your own self as a person, while this other thing is very like military-esque, militant, there we go, militantly trying to impose their views and their will and their on you, all in the name of protection, which is not a bad thing at its core. But as that comes out, you're getting into all this. It's a lot. So for me, I was like, oh man, like I totally get that. I don't have kids, so hopefully that cycle stops with me. But it is something that I think matches, or we know somebody in our lives who has gone through it. And then the cycle of abuse, like I think that was great too. Like, Blake never hits his wife. There's nothing to insinuate that they have an abusive relationship. But as he changes into a person, there's that metaphor of abuse, right? Like, you're not able to communicate. You don't know what the other person's saying. You are getting a different version of them. You can't reach them. And then, in the moments where like Ginger and Charlotte think that, maybe Blake is still there, and then he turns real quick, right? That's the same nature of the beast, so to speak. So I think that those definitely hit for me, and I could read into it very well. And then I do like some moments that resonated, like at the end where Charlotte and Ginger are looking over this gorgeous view of the mountains that Blake wanted. That's why he told Charlotte
wanted them to see that. Yeah,
he said
special
this
to
view
him.
won't. He said this view will make you forget everything else. This view will make you believe that everything is okay. And to end the movie on that note, I thought
it was pretty poetic. I think it was a pretty poetic ending in that sense. And much like you said, Whannell once again likes to focus on abuse. He did in The Invisible Man. He does it once again here from a family point of view rather than a relationship point of view. Overall, the movie, as we roll things together and end our review, I think it works pretty well. I don't think it's a new modern masterpiece, not that every movie needs to be. I think it was a very serviceable, solid, good performance piece of a Wolfman movie, and Whannell delivered mostly on what he set out to do. I think it might disappoint some fans, but overall, I walked away feeling like solid, good movie, and it was a much better start to the year than what Blumhouse gave us this time last year, which was Night Swim, and I never want to talk about it again.
Oh my God.
But Brady, as we come to final thoughts, are you going to trash it or treasure it?
Oh man, I think that this is definitely a treasure for me. It's not a Wolfman movie that I was expecting to get, because I partially didn't know what to expect, but I'm happy with the final result. Like you said, I love Ryan Gosling. I have nothing against him. I go out of my way to see his movies, but I do feel like Abbott was the right pick for this, and I have been saying that since he was cast. And I think that it shows, like you said, he's kind of that strength of this movie. Julia Garner, like I said already, I think that maybe it's how she was written, the shots they ended up using for her, the moments maybe just weren't as powerful as they were hoping. She didn't seem like an emotional core for me, but she was better than fucking Ginger, so I'll give her that.
Yeah.
And then
we're being mean.
All things considered, man, like this is at its core just a movie about transformation, and how things, whether you want to say abuse or trauma, transform you, or just fucking rabid dog DNA, wolf DNA inside of you transform you. And those moments where he's turning really wowed me and made me gasp in the theater. So for me, it's definitely a treasure. And it's something much like The Invisible Man, where I'm going to want to revisit it. Maybe not every week, but every few months to be like, cool, let me watch this. It's a quick,
it's no Manchester by the Sea by any means.
No. It's not going to make me cry. But it is poetic, and it is a tragic Wolfman tale. And at the end of the day, what I want is a meaningful transformation of a Wolfman, and also it to be tragic. I don't want it to have a happy ending, and this one didn't have a happy ending.
No, definitely didn't.
Treasure it for me.
Yeah, lock and step with you. I don't think it was a like I said, a masterpiece of a film. I do think it was very serviceable, very solid, a pretty good Wolfman movie, and I will be revisiting it, absolutely. I think the one thing about Abbott, on top of everything we've already mentioned, is his bone structure, man. That motherfucker, his face, he just looks perfect to be the Wolfman. And I would have loved to have seen a more classic take on the makeup, but overall, walking away at the end of the day, I was totally fine with what they did. Are people going to be getting this image tattooed on their legs, getting t-shirts with them? I don't know about all that, but we've already said everything else there was to say about it. Great score. There are moments of fantastic suspension and tension. And above all, I just liked that he took the classic tale and did it in a way that wasn't offensive to those that love the original. He did something classy with it and just did his own thing. If you're going to redo a classic tale, you might as well put your own spin on it and some new flavor and make it fresh. And he did that. So for those reasons, I'm going to treasure it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to this Fresh Fright review on the Wolfman. If it's your first time listening, thanks for checking us out. If you're a long time listener, we love you. We can be found, our podcast, on every single podcast platform, and we are on every social media platform at Epic Film Guys. But until next time, I'm Justin.
I'm B-Ratty.
And as we like to say, howl at the moon, baby.
Howl.